Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something truly exhilarating. Clerical paperwork in ancient Egypt. I know, try to contain your excitement. Imagine this, the sun hasn't even risen yet, and already you're sitting cross-legged on a stone bench inside a dusty scribal chamber tucked behind the granary district of Thebes. You're hunched over a splintered wooden desk with nothing but a reed pen, a handful of crushed charcoal, and the heavy awareness that if you mess up one line of hieroglyphs, someone's eternal soul might not make it to the afterlife. It's your job to record things, not glamorous things. No grand battles, no romantic poems. Your scrolls are filled with totals, goats, jars of barley, work hours, names you can barely pronounce. Your hands are already stained with ink before the first rooster calls. The air is thick with the musty smell of dried papyrus and yesterday's incense. And to make things worse, today's schedule includes a delivery from a junior scribe who once spelled cattle as battle. You probably won't survive this, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shift on your stone stool, back aching already, as you reach for your first task, copying out a receipt for temple donations. The list is painfully specific. 3 loaves of date bread, 2 ceramic amulets shaped like Horus falcons, and half a jar of sesame oil. Why half? No one explains. You just write it. The sun crawls above the horizon, its light filtering through a crooked lattice window. Dust motes dance above your ink dish like lazy spirits. Somewhere nearby, a donkey brays loud, rude, off-key. It's going to be a long day. Your supervisor, Pamu, steps in without knocking. He's wearing the same linen kilt he wore yesterday and the same unimpressed expression. You finished yesterday's death notice, he mutters. You nod. Pointing to the scroll weighted down with a lump of clay, it records the passing of a butcher's wife. Her name took you 15 minutes to decipher, and her surviving children demanded you include their full titles, even though none of them can read. Good. We've got 3 more deaths this morning, Pamu says, already turning away. Also, a cow gave birth in the Nile quarter, and we're still arguing whether that counts as taxable income. You blink. A cow's birth. He shrugs. The priests say it's sacred. The tax office says it's 10 copper dabins either way. You sigh, reaching for another roll of papyrus. Let's talk tools. Your reed pen cut by hand from marsh reeds has to be recut every few lines. Too dull, and your lines blur. Too sharp and you tear straight through the sheet. And then there's the ink, a blend of soot, gum, and water. It dries fast, but smudges faster. And don't even think about using red ink casually. It's reserved for gods. Warnings. And weirdly enough, plague reports. In the next chamber, an apprentice is sobbing softly. You overhear him mumbling. It was just one mistake. One bird symbol where it should have been a basket. Classic error. The difference between offering and insult can be one flick of the wrist. Mainstream fact time. Scribes were among the most respected professions in Egypt, sometimes even more powerful than soldiers. You were the keepers of contracts, rituals, birth and death. All the things people are scared to get wrong. Fringe tidbit. Some high priest believes certain words, if miswritten, could literally summon demons. There's a whole category of disaster glyphs banned from use except during exorcisms. You've had to copy them once while fasting and wearing a protective amulet that smelled suspiciously like goat. Historians still argue whether scribes were formally taught in centralized scribe schools, or if most training was done in temple workshops by grumpy masters like Pamu. Judging by your own lackluster instruction, you're betting on the latter. Back to the desk. You reach for the linen-wrapped death notice of a tax collector. His name includes 4 separate titles and ends with Protector of Granary. 11. His widow insists the scroll mention he died peacefully in the shade. You know for a fact he choked in a date pit during a festival. You look down at the blocky row of symbols you've already begun. The ink bleeds slightly around the ibis symbol. You blot it gently with a scrap of linen. Another rooster, another sigh. Out in the courtyard, you spot the delivery runner barefoot, sunburned, holding a small clay pot like it's the Ark of the Covenant. It's more ink. You're almost out, and it's only midday. He sets it down beside you and waits, not for a tip, for your signature. You scribble your name in standard shorthand. Bennu, scribe of Western records. The kid grins like you just handed him a pyramid. You go back to work. The sun rises higher, and so do the expectations. You drag the soft edge of your thumb along the grain of the papyrus scroll, listening for the telltale crinkle of dryness. Too dry, and it'll crack when you roll it. Too damp, and it'll smear like goat butter in summer. This particular scroll is for the royal census team. Those bureaucrats up in Memphis who wear leopard skin belts and pretend they don't make spelling mistakes. You're copying their format line for line because heaven forbid a decimal mark slips left and someone accidentally taxes an entire village twice. It's time to deal with papyrus protocols. You sigh and reach for the wooden frame that holds your parchment flat, your only real luxury besides a shady corner. To prepare a scroll the proper way, you first press it with a flat shell polished from the Red Sea, then scrape off any leftover pulp with a bit of crocodile rib. Yes, rib. No, you didn't ask questions the first time someone handed it to you. Today's assignment: create 3 clean copies of last season's granary report. That means transcribing 57 pages worth of barley, emmer, chickpeas, and missing inventory due to mysterious evaporation, right? Because crops just float away now. You line up your ink dish and begin. In the 10th year of the reign of Pharaoh Neferkare, son of Ra, lord of the 2 lands, master of reeds and protector of sacred irrigation. Why must every official document begin with a title that takes 2 whole breaths? You barely finish the line before a breeze slaps a sheet off your desk and onto the dusty floor. You scramble, praying the ink hasn't bled into a blob. You brush off the page like it's made of spider silk. It's still legible, barely, just a tiny smudge where Neferkare now looks like Neferhair. If you let that pass, it could imply that the pharaoh is part hair. You've heard of worse accidents. A scroll once turned the title Beloved of Mayat into Beloved of Meat. That poor scribe was reassigned to goat census duty in Nubia. Your fingers ache by line 47, where you're asked to include the exact number of fish caught near the delta last quarter, 486. But also include that this total was symbolically pleasing to Hapi, lord of the Nile. Why? Because the priest said so. Because symbolism matters. Because the Nile gods apparently moonlight as accountants. Mainstream fact here: Egyptian scribes were so critical to administration that many were buried with their pens and ink pots, sometimes in golden miniature form. Writing wasn't just a skill, it was power. If you could write, you could control time, tax, death. You were essentially holding Egypt together with soot and string. And now, for a weird little fringe detail, some scribes kept pet monkeys to help them turn scrolls or shoo away flies. There's even a mural in Saqqara showing a monkey holding a quill while a man points at a papyrus, clearly yelling. It's not clear if the monkey ever actually wrote anything, but he looks deeply regretful. Anyway, your hand's cramping. You lean back. Across the room, another scribe Meru, the self-declared Lord of Ink Ratios, is muttering under his breath. He's trying to replicate a formula for measuring rainfall using flax rope and fish scales. You give him a nod. He doesn't look up. He's probably working on one of those astronomically aligned harvest charts that take 6 months to check and 6 seconds to ignore. You look back down at your scroll and remember you forgot to leave space for the tax collector's seal. Great! Now you have to squeeze it between Blessed Harvest and Barley Quotient and make it look intentional. It doesn't, but with a bit of extra red ink and a symbol that looks vaguely like a sheaf of wheat, you fake a decorative flourish? Historians still argue whether all scribes used standard templates or if each district developed its own absurd system of formality. Based on your experience, you're convinced every office has its own sacred chaos, like one temple that insists on listing grain amounts backwards because of some ancient eclipse. As you roll up the completed scroll, you dust it with a mix of sand and crushed lotus petal. A sort of bureaucratic potpourri meant to seal the words and prevent spiritual leakage. At least, that's what your predecessor told you. He also once claimed a poorly inked Ra symbol caused a storage fire. Who knows? You prepare the next document, which starts with, "Behold the quantities of lentils surrendered by the people of Shadet." and ends with a polite death threat for late payments. Typical. Suddenly, Pamu enters again, clutching a jar. New ink batch. He grunts, made with imported acacia soot. Expensive. Don't waste it. You inspect it. The texture is smoother, almost oily. A good sign. Also smells vaguely of citrus, which is unusual. You don't ask. You never ask. As you dip your pen and begin the next line, a single fly lands on your scroll. You pause, stare at it, hold your breath, and then gently blow. It flies off. Small victories. You complete 2 more reports before your wrist starts twitching involuntarily. You switch hands. It doesn't help. Your left-hand hieroglyphs look like a heron drew them mid-flight, but the stack of required scrolls hasn't shrunk, and the temple runner is due at sunset. You double-check every line. The ones about famine taxes, livestock birth estimates, and flood damage calculations. The scroll feels heavier than it should, like it's already fed up with being alive. You press your seal into a bit of wet clay and place it at the bottom of the scroll. The mark reads, "Authorized by order of the Grain Circle." That sounds more impressive than it is. You're the only Grain Circle member who still shows up on time. You place the finished scroll beside the others and stretch your spine, vertebrae cracking like sun-dried onions. You look around the archive room walls lined with cubbies stuffed with papyrus bundles, many of them forgotten, most of them mislabeled. Some haven't been touched since Pharaoh Amenemhat lost a sandal and blamed the scribe corps. You close your eyes for a moment, just long enough to imagine a better life. Maybe as a fisherman, maybe even as that monkey. The moment you step into the granary compound, you regret everything. First, the stench, a pungent fusion of old barley, sun-baked dung, and something suspiciously acidic that might have been a melon 3 days ago. Second, the chaos. Farmers are clustered in every corner, shouting, pointing, bargaining with overseers. Goats bleat like they're auditioning for an opera. And third, your mission today, auditing a farmer's grain output for the seasonal tax records. Which sounds easy. It is not. You pull your linen cloak tighter, already regretting the choice to wear sandals. The dust here clings like gossip, and every stone seems determined to stub your toe. Your escort, a temple guard with the world's most tragic beard, gestures toward a small table shaded by a collapsing linen awning. You say, open your ledger and await your victim. Sorry, your taxpayer. He arrives with a cart and a grin. His name is Kiba, and you've met him before. Last harvest, he claimed 3 sacks of millet went missing due to a miraculous gust of divine wind. That's right. The gods of agriculture apparently moonlight as crop thieves now. You begin the formal questioning. State your full name and farming allotment. You say, dipping your reed pen into fresh ink. Kiba smirks. Kaba, son of Kemen. Tiller of 4 rows by the eastern bend, blessed by the gaze of Toweret. You nod, writing it all down. You include the Toweret part, even though she's a fertility goddess and has no known jurisdiction over barley. He presents his grain sacks. You count them, twice. 5 full sacks, 1 half filled. He insists it's 6 total. You raise an eyebrow. He raises both hands to the sky. I gave the rest to the temple. He claims an offering. You ask for the receipt. He produces a smudged scrap with exactly 1 hieroglyph and a thumbprint. Of course, mainstream fact here. Taxation in ancient Egypt wasn't paid in coin, but in goods, grain, beer, linen, or livestock. Scribes were responsible for calculating and collecting these taxes, and while the pharaoh might have issued decrees, it was folks like you doing the dirty work. Fringe tidbit. Some grain taxes were measured in units of hecats, and scribes sometimes used baked clay measuring cones shaped like cobras. Why cobras? To discourage tampering, allegedly, though one scribe famously used a hollow cobra to sneak home lentils for months before being caught by a monkey, no less. You try to weigh the sacks, but your scale is unbalanced. Probably kicked by a cow last week. You make a note to adjust the totals manually and hope no one in Memphis decides to cross-check the math. As you work, the sun climbs higher. Sweat drips off your nose and smudges the Hecat symbol. You blot it with the hem of your robe. You know, real professional. You glance over and notice a competing scribe, seated across the courtyard, giving you the side eye. That's Hedju. He works for the Upper Nile district and once tried to outbid you for the chief scribal seat at the last audit festival by slipping the inspector a honey cake. you still haven't forgiven him. His honeycakes are dry. Hedju's approach to tax forms is looser. Shall we say, he believes in rounded estimates, especially when nobles are involved. Last season, he declared one estate temporarily missing to delay taxation. Temporarily missing. A 30-acre estate. You squint back at Kiba. Anything else to declare? He hesitates, then slowly pulls a small, limp fish from a pouch. Caught this near the irrigation canal. Sacred offering. Might as well include it. You pause, then sigh, then write, one fish, dried, presented voluntarily as offering to the gods. Value, negligible. Historians still argue whether scribes were allowed to reject gifts during audits. Some claim acceptance was forbidden. Others believe it was expected, as long as the gift wasn't excessively edible. So, this fish, probably legal. Probably. You finish the audit and hand Kiba a slip confirming his contribution. He squints at it, grins, and walks away, his cart now conveniently empty. Your stomach growls. No breakfast. No time. But the next farmer is already approaching. A thin woman with sharp eyes and a ledger thicker than yours. She's the one who files appeals. The one who brings witnesses. The one who threatened to sue a priest for overestimating her goat's wool production. You ready your pen? She slams down a sack of grain with the confidence of someone who knows math better than you do. Measure it. She snaps. You do. Twice. You also triple-check the units because last time she accused you of confusing heckat with indolence. She wasn't wrong. Halfway through, your pen breaks, splinters. You dig out a spare reed, slice it open with your knife, and test it on your wrist. The ink runs thick and dark, perfect for dramatic flourishes. You're going to need it. By the end of her audit, she's argued 3 footnotes, corrected your spelling, and requested a duplicate copy on thicker parchment. For legal protection, you hand it over. She nods, satisfied, and disappears in a swirl of linen. You slump forward. There's still a line. 4 more farmers. One claims his sheep are part deity. One has no tongue but brought a friend to mime tax figures. One insists he paid last season in dreams. And one's trying to pay in beer. The beer one's your favorite. As you lift your pen again, you imagine a different life. Maybe managing date orchards. Maybe being a fisherman. Maybe just sleeping for once. But no, you've got tax scrolls to write with ink that smells like burnt raisins and a deadline shorter than your temper. You're halfway through transcribing a mortuary notice when your pen hovers over one particularly dangerous symbol. The name of the deceased. It's not just any name. It's the official posthumous designation of Hori, High Steward of the Temple of Hathor, and a man so obsessed with bureaucratic perfection that he once submitted a 19-page complaint about improper goat tethering. His death should have been the end of his paperwork. But no, now you're responsible for immortalizing his name correctly. Forever. If you so much as curve the wrong bird, he might end up in the wrong part of the afterlife. You've heard too many stories about scribes who made a one-glyph error and doomed someone's soul to wander, confused and name-blurred. In the fields of reeds, you carefully write HR Jadvu HG Hori, triumphant. But halfway through, a bead of sweat drips down your brow and smack hits the parchment, right on the second glyph. You freeze. Did it blot the owl? If that owl becomes a vulture, the name turns into Haru, an entirely different man. A man who, if the underworld bureaucracy is as strict as this one, just got summoned to judgment out of the blue. Mainstream fact. In ancient Egypt, names were believed to contain the essence of the person. To miswrite a name was not just a clerical error, it was an existential insult. That's why tomb inscriptions went through 3 rounds of review before carving. Fringe tidbit. Some tomb artists secretly inserted personal jokes into the hieroglyphs, like slightly modifying the determinative for eternal rest to resemble their supervisor's bad haircut. These jokes usually went unnoticed. For 3,000 years, historians still argue whether these scribal mistakes were genuine accidents or quiet acts of resistance. After all, who watches the pen watchers? And who proofreads the dead? You reach for a blotting cloth and dab the spot. Gently, gingerly. You think you've saved it? The owl is still an owl. Hori will rest in peace, or at least not sue you from beyond. The rest of the scroll includes the standard funeral phrases. May he journey westward under the wings of the sycamore goddess. May his caress beside Osiris, and not in the sandpit of misfiling. May the accountants of the underworld accept his offerings without audit. You pause on the last one. You've always liked that line. It sounds like something you'd write for yourself. You seal the scroll with a dollop of wax, press it with the mortuary ring, and place it gently into the archive tube labeled Departed Functionaries. Month of Thoth. Not the most cheerful label, but at least it's alphabetized. Next up, an appeal from a widow whose husband's name was misspelled on his tomb. The original inscription called him Teti the Smelly. She insists it was supposed to be Teti the Small, which, frankly, isn't that much better. You draft a correction order on official parchment, copy the new epithet 3 times, and dispatch a temple boy to deliver it to the stone carvers. You include an extra half loaf of date bread as a bribe to chisel carefully this time. Your lunch break is 5 minutes of staring into a clay bowl of lentil stew while listening to another scribe recite a joke about Anubis and a goat. You don't laugh. You haven't laughed since you tried to file 2 identical papyrus rolls and accidentally initiated a redundancy curse. You return to your desk, where a small pile of urgent scrolls waits. Urgent, in this case, means a priest is breathing down your neck. One of the scrolls is a tomb inventory, amulets, canopic jars, ceremonial comb, 4 jars of beer not to be consumed, and a cat, yes, a mummified cat, carefully wrapped, marked with its own death scroll, and listed as beloved guardian of dreams. You nod. Respect. You recall that time a tomb inventory listed 1,000 loaves of bread, and you had to add a footnote explaining it was symbolic. The tomb had barely enough room for a broom closet. Still, you wrote it out every loaf, just in case the gods were literalists. As the sun shifts and golden light creeps across your floor, you find yourself correcting another scribe's draft. He's written the glyph for resurrection upside down, which changes it to inconvenient fish, a small but notable difference. You call him over and gently point at the mistake. He groans, "I hate fish." You reply, then stop summoning them into eternity. He doesn't laugh, but he fixes it. Historians still argue whether scribes were judged more harshly for errors in sacred texts versus tax records. You say sacred gets divine wrath, but tax errors get real-time yellings. Either way, it's wrath. By evening, you're drafting your 5th correction of the day. This one's for a noblewoman who wants her name followed by beloved of Sekhmet instead of blessed by Bastet. The change is subtle, but the symbolism isn't. Sekhmet is a lioness goddess of war. Bastet, a domestic cat goddess. So basically, she wants to go from cozy to lethal. You wonder what grudge she carried to the grave. You write it out, clean and firm, and seal it with gold-tinted ink. You roll your aching neck, set down your pen, and stare at the fading sun. Another name saved, another soul guided, another crisis over, mostly. And then you hear someone shouting outside, a new report, a new name, and probably a new nightmare. You're barely seated when the guard bursts in, sandals slapping loudly against the polished limestone. Emergency inventory update. He pants, holding out a folded scroll sealed with green wax and odd color, usually reserved for either high temple edicts or onion shipments. This one, unfortunately, is the former. You crack the seal and skim. Great. You've just been summoned to one of the high temples to update their livestock records, which means you're headed straight into the labyrinthine chaos of the temple granaries, goat pens, ceremonial stables, and worst of all, the scribal office run by the high priest's nephew, who once tried to file a goat under musical instruments. You pack your tools, ink, spare reeds, a measuring string, 2 blank scrolls, and a little clay amulet shaped like a hedgehog for luck. You have no idea if it works. But considering the temple once accidentally sacrificed a cow meant for census, you'll take whatever divine backup you can get. By mid-morning, you're sweating through your linen tunic as you trudge through the temple's southern gate. The guards wave you in with a mix of boredom and mild disdain. One of them offers a chewed fig as a welcome. You decline. Inside, the temple bustles like a well-funded beehive. Incense stings your nose. Acolytes bustle past carrying trays of dates, milk, and scrolls bigger than your torso. Somewhere in the distance, you hear chanting, possibly a hymn. Possibly someone rehearsing their tax appeal. You're led through 3 side halls and 1 inner courtyard to a vaulted chamber that smells of animal fur, old parchment, and very faintly of sandalwood. The livestock scribe is already waiting. His name is Panesi, and he's everything you feared. Robes too clean, fingers too soft, and an infuriatingly perfect script. We have discrepancies, he says, handing you a list. You read, 5 oxen unaccounted for, 2 calves listed twice, 1 ceremonial ibis mislabeled as chicken. You rub your temples. Where did the oxen go? He shrugs. One priest says divine intervention. Another says they escaped during last week's eclipse. Mainstream fact. Temples in ancient Egypt didn't just serve religious functions. They were massive economic hubs. They owned land, managed labor, held livestock, and kept warehouses full of food and treasure. Each one was its own mini bureaucracy. Fringe tidbit. Some temples had secret shadow ledgers, parallel records hidden in locked chests, known only to a handful of senior priests. These were used to skim offerings, conceal missing inventory, or fudge festival numbers. In some cases, these double books were more detailed than the official ones. Historians still argue whether the shadow ledgers were widespread practice or just a clever trick used by a few enterprising priest accountants. Either way, they existed, and right now, you're pretty sure you're dealing with one. You ask for the original scroll from the last inventory. Panesi hesitates. Then, with the air of someone confessing to losing a sacred cat, he pulls it from under a stack of prayer orders. It's water-stained and smells faintly of goat. You begin comparing. You spot it immediately. The extra calves, same name, copied twice. The oxen, likely borrowed by the Temple of Khnum for last week's flood rites. The ibis, not even a bird, it's a statue of one. You sigh so deeply your bones feel it. You begin dictating corrections, slowly and clearly. Panesi copies them down, his pen hand trembling slightly. You're pretty sure he's never written while being watched. Welcome to your life. As you work, 2 junior priests barge in mid-inventory to announce that the blessed goat of Kurdi has gone missing. Again. Apparently, it climbed onto a ceremonial raft and drifted halfway down the sacred canal. It's now floating somewhere between divine symbol and logistical problem. You nod grimly. Listed as spiritually relocated. Reassess after the next full moon. Panesi stares at you. You're serious. You stare back. I once had to catalog a cow that died mid-procession. I listed it as temporarily horizontal. You finish the scroll with a flourish, sign your name, and press your seal into a small wax blob shaped like a lotus. It's not your usual stamp your old one cracked during the winter flooding, so now you use this borrowed temple seal. You don't know whose it was originally, but it smells strongly of onions. That can't be good. You hand the scroll to Panesi. Submit this to the temple accountant by dusk. Do not lose it under a prayer mat again. He bows, then promptly trips over his own foot and spills ink on his robes. You do not help him. On your way out, you pass a priest yelling at a goat. You're not sure which one looks more guilty. Back at your archive room, Pamiu is waiting, arms folded. Well, he asks. You hand him the backup scroll. 2 calves deleted. 1 ox found in a ritual pit. The ibis turned out to be a statue, and the goat's gone on sabbatical. He scans it briefly, nods, and says, so, a normal day. You sit back down at your desk and take a long drink from your water jug. It tastes like dust and regret, but it's wet. And right now, that's enough. You open your logbook to record the day's adjustments. Just as you begin to write, you hear a faint tapping behind the wall, probably rats. But just in case, you add a note. Suspected shadow ledger activity confirmed. Recommend locking grain records nightly. Then you cross your fingers and pray the next scroll doesn't involve a god's pet flamingo. It's barely dawn when you're summoned again. This time, the head courier of the records division wakes you with an enthusiastic slap on the door and a scroll marked immediate transmission. You squint at the seal. Purple wax. Oh no, that's the color they use when they've made a clerical error so bad it must be walked through the desert. Deliver this to the Dakhla Oasis, the courier says cheerfully, as if he just offered you a slice of date pie. Urgent filing update. You'll need to leave now to make the 6-day deadline. You stare at him. You're joking. He blinks. It's tax relief documentation for a grain shortage exemption. They're still using last year's rate. Poor farmers could be getting charged for grain they never even harvested. You rub your eyes. Why can't we send it by river, flooded, or crocodiles? Maybe both. You don't bother packing a scroll satchel. You grab one from the wall, still dusty from your last field run. You gather your pens, water flask, some pressed lentil cakes, and a worn pair of sandals that might as well be parchment themselves. Then you set off across the sands, scroll in hand, muttering curses about people who can't just update their rate tables. By noon, your robe is stiff with dust and sweat, and the wind has picked up enough to make every step feel like dragging your feet through an oven made of flour. The sun hangs overhead, a giant smug overseer watching your every stumble. The scroll, your sacred burden, is wrapped in 3 layers of linen, tied with a cord, and tucked against your chest. If you drop it, if you smudge it, if the ink runs or the stamp fades, you'll be accused of tampering with official records. Mainstream fact: messengers and field scribes in ancient Egypt had to personally deliver critical documents over vast distances, on foot or camel. Since the postal system as we think of it didn't exist, certain scrolls were so important, they were sent with guards or even buried with backup copies. Fringe tidbit: one scribe from the reign of Ramesses II reportedly walked 200 miles with a scroll tucked under his armpit. He lost the scroll, but delivered the sweat-soaked linen that had once wrapped it. The priest called it symbolic preservation. The tax office fined him anyway. Historians still argue whether there was a formal penalty structure for late deliveries, or if scribes simply faced ritual humiliation like having to recite their mistake in front of a room full of junior scribes. You'd honestly prefer the fine? Around mid-afternoon, you stop at a way-stationy mud-brick post with a shaded awning, a stone bench, and a barrel of stale water. You press the scroll against your forehead, then gently unroll the top to inspect the wax seal. Still intact. You reward yourself with half a lentil cake. It tastes like papyrus. You push onward. The wind's worse now, and by evening, sand scrapes your cheeks like dry parchment. You wrap your scarf tighter and mumble your destination to passing herders. One of them nods toward the west. A storm's coming. You'll want to reach the next well before night. You thank him and start walking faster. By moonrise, you're coughing sand and squinting into a dim torch as you collapse near a roadside shrine, a tiny hollow carved in rock, holding a crude statue of Thoth with a feather and a wink. Of course, the god of scribes. You set the scroll gently beside the statue and mumble a prayer. Thoth, if this scroll survives the night, I swear I'll stop doodling ibis jokes in the margins. A faint breeze lifts your scarf as if acknowledging the promise. The next morning, the sand has buried your legs to the ankle, but the scroll is untouched. Miraculous. You dig yourself free and continue the march. 2 more days of sore calves, lukewarm water, and grunting at goats you mistake for demons in the dark. You arrive at the Dakhla archives late on the 6th day, barely within deadline, and slam the scroll down on the registrar's desk. The man behind it, bald, cheerful, and clearly not in a hurry, peels back the linen with maddening slowness. Then he frowns. This stamp, he says, was updated last week. You blink. What? They changed the seal. Green wax now. Purple's out. You exhale through your nose. You're telling me I walked across the Sahara with an invalid stamp? He shrugs. Rules are rules. You dig into your satchel and pull out your emergency wax and seal kit. Then watch me fix it. You melt down the purple wax with a pinch of dried fig, swirl it with a fragment of green inkstone, and restamp the scroll with the temple's spare seal. It looks fine. A little homemade, but fine. You slap it on the desk. Filed? He nods. Filed. You turn to leave, but then pause. Do you have a courier I can send back to Memphis? He nods again. Of course. Leaves at dawn. You grin. Hand him a spare scroll. And write, to Pamiu. The scroll was filed. The wax was wrong. I fixed it. I'm taking 3 days off and stealing your wine. Love, Bennu. You roll it up, seal it with the hedgehog, then collapse onto the stone bench. Your knees stiff, your sandals ruined, and your dignity oddly intact. Tomorrow, you'll limp home. Tonight, you sleep like a mummy. You return to Memphis with sand still trapped in places sand should never be. Pamu greets you not with sympathy or applause, but with a casual, "Good. You're back. I saved your seat." That's code for, "Your desk's a mess and someone put a fish scroll on top of your tomb records." You sigh and start to unpack. There's a comforting familiarity to your little corner. The ink-smudged slab of limestone you call a desk, your chipped pen stand, the half-crushed lotus someone gave you on your birthday and you forgot to throw away, and, of course, the ever-growing stack of scrolls marked pending in aggressive red ink. Today's joy, preparing tomb documentation for a man who isn't even dead yet. Wealthy brewer, full of opinions, wants everything prepared early so that when he dies, which he swears won't be for at least 3 more festivals, he can be buried quickly and tastefully. You unroll his prep scroll, and it's already a nightmare. His desired titles take up half a page. Ziam, brewer of sacred ferments, keeper of the blessed yeast, minister of foam, devoted to Bastet, and occasional donor to the Temple of Sedge. You exhale through your nose. It gets worse. He's submitted custom glyphs, one that merges a jug, a sunbeam, and a loaf of bread to represent his spirit essence, another that vaguely resembles a dancing cat, which he insists evokes eternity. You stare at it. It evokes indigestion. Mainstream fact. Wealthy individuals in Egypt often commissioned their own tomb texts and imagery long before death. The idea was to secure one's place in the afterlife, ensure proper rituals were performed, and let's be honest, leave behind the ultimate resume. Fringe tidbit. Some patrons paid extra to include boast glyphs, sections of text exaggerating their wealth, beauty, or influence. There's a known case of a low-ranking fishmonger who paid for a wall carving that declared him first counselor to the moon. No one stopped him. Historians still argue whether these personalized additions were honored in ritual practice or just ignored by priests who'd seen it all. You think it depends on the size of the donation. Ziam's file includes a shopping list of tomb goods. 3 statues of himself smiling but mysterious. 1 golden beer ladle. A miniature brewery with tiny reed vats. A painted scene of him receiving barley from Ra himself. And, of course, 4 elegant scrolls documenting all my generous temple donations. You've seen his donation record. It's mostly fermented honey and a very awkward statue of a goose. You begin drafting the burial scrolls, carefully inscribing each section using extra thick ink. The tomb documents must survive millennia, so every word matters. You mix fresh pigment, black from soot, red from iron oxide, and a hint of blue from crushed lapis for decorative borders. It smells like vinegar and ambition. You hum as you work, not because you're happy, just to keep from snarling. You finish the introductory line. Ziam, brewer of sacred ferments, now walks among the eternal vats of heaven, where the foam of Ra dances on the tongues of the blessed. You pause. That's actually kind of good. You glance at the blank space for list of virtues. Ziam supplied a draft. You read it. Generous, modest, handsome, blessed, handsome again. You strike through one handsome and add patient with scribes, then smile a little. As you prepare the section on offerings, you check the standard lines: bread, beer, ox, fowl, incense, linen, alabaster, but Ziam's list includes pomegranate-scented oils, a dancing girl made of clay, 20 miniature cups with gold rims, one lucky cat. You carefully write, "May he receive all his comforts in the next world," including items both standard and delightfully personal. That's called professional tact. A few hours in, a junior scribe pokes his head in. Ziam's here, he whispers, wants to review the draft in person. You look up from your ink-stained hands. Of course he does. Ziam arrives moments later, trailing perfume and ego. He squints at your desk, picks up your pen, and says, "Feels soft. Do you have firmer ones?" You take a long, slow breath and hand him your backup read. "Please, inspect freely." He does. He nods. He flips through a few lines and says, "Can we add a bit more mystery? Maybe something about how I will one day return as a breeze." You nod slowly. A breeze. A sacred breeze. You scribble a note, "And he shall stir the reeds of the western winds, his breath cool as rebirth." He beams. Perfect. He leaves a tip. A single dried fig. Historians still argue whether scribes were paid fairly or simply gifted in fruit, beer, or vague promises of divine favor. Your personal ledger includes 3 figs, half a jug of wine, and a statuette of Anubis missing one ear. By sunset, you've sealed Zayem's documents, placed them in a ceramic tube, and labeled it Pre-Dead Tomb 401. You stretch your arms, wipe your ink-dusted nose, and light a little cone of temple incense. The room fills with myrrh and quiet satisfaction. You may not have gold or glory, but someone's afterlife now hinges on your handwriting. And that, bizarrely, feels like power. The crocodile quarter. You try not to come here often. It's not just the smell, though, that alone could knock the linen off a priest. It's the humidity, the fish guts, the lurking green shapes in the canals that keep eyeing your feet like appetizers. But today, you've been sent to copy a batch of legal contracts. And of course, they're in the one archive stored near the crocodile ponds. Because nothing says secure storage like placing fragile scrolls next to ancient predators. You tie your sash tighter, keep your sandals well above the waterline, and make your way to the low building at the edge of the quarter. A faded sign above the doorway reads, Ministry of Water Tax and Aquatic Goods. Beneath it, someone has scratched in, also home to terror. Inside, it's dark, damp, and full of flies. Scrolls hang from ceiling hooks to stay out of the wet. A cat dozes on a basket of papyrus. It opens one eye when you enter, judges you silently, then goes back to sleep. A local clerk named Che is already waiting. He has a missing eyebrow and the look of someone who has stopped believing in dry parchment. They're in the corner, he says, gesturing to a heap of documents bound together with fraying rope. You pick one up and wince. The bottom edges are damp. Possibly blood, possibly fish sauce, possibly worse. Are these the originals? You ask. TJ shrugs. They're what's left. You sit at the corner table wobbly, sun-bleached, suspiciously sticky, and begin copying. First scroll, a lease agreement for a small dockside hut, with stipulations about boat size, offering rituals, and fish storage boundaries. The fine print warns against disrespecting sacred crocodiles. Second scroll, a contract between 2 merchants disputing fish weights. One claims the other used illegally wet scales. You write it all, word for word, dry humor included. Third scroll, a temple decree stating that the canal near the Lotus Gate is not to be used for laundry. Disposal of amulets, or bathing cats. Mainstream fact. Crocodiles were both feared and worshipped in ancient Egypt. In some regions, sacred crocs were mummified and even kept in temple ponds. The city of Crocodilopolis, yes, really honored Sobek, the crocodile god, and even had a sacred reptile adorned with jewelry. Fringe tidbit. There are recorded instances of legal trials involving crocodile attacks. In one, the crocodile was declared an instrument of divine judgment, and the surviving plaintiff was told to reflect humbly and donate grain. No one mentioned restitution or therapy. Historians still argue whether crocodile worship actually reduced attacks or simply gave scribes more paperwork. Judging by your day so far, you vote the latter. Mid-copy, your pen jerks across the page. You look down, small tremor, and then you hear it. A slithering shuffle, wet claws against stone. Che stops mid-sentence. Don't move, he whispers. You move. Very, very slowly. Through the half-open door slinks a crocodile. Not huge, just a juvenile, but still large enough to eat your leg and possibly your pen case. It snorts. It waddles. It locks eyes with the cat. Who does not wake up? You hold your breath. Your ink bottle quivers slightly. Jay throws a dried fish toward the door. The croc follows, leisurely, as if it's offended by the lack of presentation. Once it exits, you slump in your chair. TA wipes his forehead. That's Nenu. He lives under the floor, mostly comes up for meetings. You try to speak, but your tongue is still hiding behind your tonsils. Back to work. Your reed pen is shaking slightly, but you keep copying. You're now halfway through a property dispute about canal rights when a drop of condensation falls from the ceiling and splashes on your scroll. You blot it quickly, hoping it won't stain. It does. Great. You redraw the glyphs for sacred boundary, only to realize you've used the wrong fish symbol. The current one denotes slippery rather than divine. That changes the line from holy waterline boundary to beware of slippery holiness. You cross it out. Twice. Add a clarification note. Hope no priest notices. Historians still argue whether regional scribes had standardized symbols or local variations. You're living proof that sometimes a fish is just a fish, and sometimes it's a theological nightmare. You finish the final scroll with fingers stained, back aching, and a small scratch on your ankle you don't remember getting. As you hand the copies to Che, he nods, then casually lifts one to sniff it. This one smells like basil. Must have been next to the offerings. He shrugs. Fine by me. You don't ask what basil means in this context. You gather your tools, exit the building, and promise yourself 3 things. Never work near crocodile shrines again. Always check ceilings for drips. Avoid cats with better job security than you. As you walk back through the quarter, a street vendor offers you a skewer of something grilled. Crocodile tail. He whispers proudly. You smile faintly. Not today. You've spent enough time around sacred reptiles, and frankly, you think they're winning. There's an unspoken rule in the scribe chambers. Never run out of black ink during ceremonial decree season. So naturally, you do. You'd been working late, really late, on a proclamation detailing the pharaoh's renewed favor toward temple musicians. It's got the usual flourishes, poetic metaphors, gold leaf margin designs, divine epithets that stretch 2 full lines. You'd just finished the final stanza when your pen hits dry. No ink, just a pathetic scratch across the sacred raw shines through lyres and tambourines line. You blink, shake the reed. Nothing. You upend your pot and see only dried flakes and a stubborn clump of what used to be ink but now resembles a raisin's evil cousin. You look around. Everyone's gone home. No apprentices. No night guard. Just you. This royal decree. And the clock ticking down toward the temple ceremony at dawn. Of course. Mainstream fact. Black ink was made from a careful mix of soot, gum arabic, and water blended to a specific consistency, dark enough for clarity but thin enough for reed flow. Red ink reserved for gods, names, and warnings used iron oxide. Both were precious, and apprentices guarded ink recipes like state secrets. Fringe tidbit. Some scribes experimented with emergency inks made from unlikely things. Crushed figs, red wine dregs, fish liver oil. There's one scroll in the Karnak archives with ink that later tested positive for fermented date paste. It's still readable, sticky, but readable. Historians still argue whether these improvisations were officially allowed or desperate shortcuts punished with reassignment to latrine records. You stare at your empty pot, then at your desk, then at the shadow creeping across the wall like a judgmental house cat. Time to improvise. You rummage through your satchel and pull out a leftover wineskin, a dried beetle shell, don't ask, a twist of cloth soaked in last week's incense water, one stub of charcoal from the temple brazier. It's a potion, or a disaster, or both. You crush the beetle shell, first shiny, brittle, iridescent. Mix it with the charcoal. Pour in a splash of wine. Stir with a broken pen nib. You whisper an apology to Thoth as you swirl the goo into something thick, deep, purple-black, shimmery. It smells faintly of sacrilege. You test it on a scrap. It glides. You blink. You grin. And you rewrite the smeared line, this time with extra flair. Ra, in his brilliance, gifts, music to the morning and rhythm to the stars. Nice. You lean into it, finishing the remaining lines with your improvised ink. It shimmers slightly when it dries. You convince yourself this is a divine sign, not a recipe for disaster. By the time the sun peeks into your scribe chamber, the decree is done. You hold it up. The glyphs gleam like beetle wings. The margins are crisp. The poetry sings. You exhale. Then a soft knock. A junior acolyte peeks in. Is the decree ready? You hand it over like it's an offering to the gods. Don't fold it. Don't sneeze near it. And for the love of Osiris, don't let it get wet. He scurries off. You collapse into your chair. That's when Pamiu enters. He sniffs the air. Is that beetle wine? You nod, eyes closed. He sighs. You know, you could have just borrowed from the temple reserves. You open one eye. You mean the ones locked in the storage vault behind the sacred ibis door that only opens during solstice hours. He grunts. Still, better than gambling with dung ink. You smile faintly. It's art. It's alive. Pamiu shrugs. If the priests approve it, maybe you're a genius. If not, he doesn't finish the sentence. You both know the punishment for desecrating sacred text involves public correction under supervision, where junior scribes laugh as you copy. I will not use fermented plum ink 100 times. You spend the afternoon nervously checking the courtyard, expecting an angry messenger to come yelling about glittering glyphs. None comes. In fact, by evening, a palace courier appears holding a scroll wrapped in linen. Response from the high priests. He says, you open it. One line. Approved. Unexpected vibrancy noted. Favorable to Ra's essence. You laugh. Pamu grunts. You'll regret this. They'll want you to recreate it. You lean back, stretch your fingers, and stare at the empty pot. You'll need more beetles, maybe stronger wine, and a better excuse. But for now, the decree stands, glowing slightly, just like you. It's well past midday, and your legs are cramping from sitting in the same posture for 6 hours straight. But there's no time to complain. You've just received a new assignment from the Intertemple Audit Committee. It's one of those requests. You unroll the decree and read, conduct full tally of abstract assets listed in ceremonial storage chambers, spirits of barley, echoes of blessings, jars of divine presence. You blink, then blink again. Because that's not metaphor. They want you to physically inventory the invisible. You look up at Pamu. He doesn't even try to make eye contact. Yeah, he says, chewing a date. That one's yours. You protest. Spirits of barley. How do you count something that doesn't have weight? He shrugs. Ask the priests. I'm busy with duck quotas. So now, here you are, standing in a temple chamber filled with shelves of sealed jars, each labeled with things like whispers of harvest gratitude, morning fog from first sowing, ancestral scent, mild, tithes of silence reserved, and of course, your favorite, soul of beer. Do not open. You sigh. You grab your ledger, and you begin. Entry 1. 112 jars of blessings. General use. Some are cracked. Some are still faintly warm. One is vibrating. You decide to mark it as unstable. Entry 2. 3 amphorae, labeled Echoes of Praise. Year 4. The wax seals are intact, but a priest swears that they've grown quieter. You nod solemnly and add a footnote. Subjective decrease in sonic residue, possibly seasonal. Mainstream fact. Egyptian temples kept symbolic offerings and abstract ritual items alongside physical ones. These could be inscribed, painted, or sealed within containers as a gesture to the gods. They weren't meant to be opened, they were offerings, not assets. Fringe tidbit. One preserved chamber in Abydos contained a sealed jar marked Sneeze of Osiris. Scholars still debate whether it was a joke, a metaphor, or some long-forgotten ritual involving divine respiratory events. Historians still argue whether scribes actually believed in tracking these non-material assets, or simply went along with it to appease temple officials. You, personally, believe in deadlines, and that means counting every last jar of invisible fog. Entry 3. A row of 4 alabaster boxes labeled Potential for Rain. You tap one gently. It hums. You're not sure if it's from the box or your own nerves, but you log it anyway. Entry 4. A sealed scroll canister labeled Thoughts of Cows. You stare at it for a while. What thoughts? Happy thoughts. Existential dread. You make a note. Undetermined bovine cognition. Possibly sacred. At one point, a priest enters carrying a feather. He hands it to you solemnly. This is the hush of the harvest moon. Added to Chamber 7 inventory. You write it down. 1 feather. Classified as lunar hush. You're no longer surprised. Midway through your list, you notice something odd. 1 jar labeled Blessing of Ra filtered is marked as present in the official ledger, but it's missing from the shelf. You double-check, triple-check. Gone. You flag it, marking possible misplacement or divine absorption in progress. Another priest walks by. Be sure to verify the jars of sacred longing. One was whispering last night. You nod. Did it specify what it longed for? He frowns. That's not our business. You dutifully inspect the longing jars. They're cool to the touch. One rattles faintly. You write, rattling longing detected. No visible distress. By late afternoon, your pen is running out of ink, and your brain is running out of metaphors. You pause in front of a shimmering urn marked Glory Deferred. You sit cross-legged and just stare at it. You're not sure if you're still doing your job or if the job is doing you. Historians still argue whether audits of this nature were performative rituals or genuine bureaucratic exercises. You now argue with ghosts. A soft breeze passes through the chamber. You look around. There are no windows. The jars tremble ever so slightly. A few of them clink like they're toasting something. You mutter to yourself, "Please don't be possessed, inventory." Then you finish the tally. Final entry. Chamber complete. 72 jars intact. 6 likely metaphorical, 3 possibly leaking blessings, 1 stolen or ascended. Scribe unsure. You seal the scroll with your signature and a stamp marked "Clerical Best Effort." You hand it to the overseeing priest, who doesn't even blink at the section labeled "Phantom Humidity Issues." He nods. Ra sees your diligence. You nod back. Ra owes me lunch. As you exit, a jar on the lower shelf lets out a faint hum. You ignore it. You filed hums before. They rarely respond to complaints. You barely sit down when a red ribbon scroll slaps against your desk. It's from the palace. You break the seal and immediately feel your stomach drop like a clay pot off a rooftop. It's a birth date revision. For the pharaoh. Again, you don't even finish reading before groaning aloud. Because you know what this means: every document, every decree, every official calendar, lunar cycle, offering table, festival alignment, flood chart, and harvest marker referencing the king's age now has to be edited retroactively. It's the 4th change this decade. Apparently, a new priestly interpretation of star positions has revealed the pharaoh was born under the true eye of Horus, 1 month earlier than previously thought, which means that half the country has already celebrated his birthday, and now they're wrong. You flip through the decree. Yep, all existing documents must reflect the new birth date henceforth, including all ceremonial acknowledgments, festival records, and horoscope allocations. Of course, you look up at Pamu, who's chewing on a piece of reed. He's older now. Pamu shakes his head. Younger. By 2 weeks. You blink. Didn't he just turn 37? Pamu snorts. Not anymore. Mainstream fact. Egyptian rulers often had birthdays tied to sacred calendars, astronomical events, lunar cycles, symbolic alignments. These weren't just celebrations, they were cosmic confirmations of divine rule. Changing the date wasn't uncommon, especially when a new priesthood faction rose to power. Fringe tidbit. There's an ancient scroll that records one pharaoh celebrating 3 birthdays in a single year due to necessary realignments. It led to an unexpected shortage of fig cakes and a very annoyed royal baker. Historians still argue whether these changes were due to actual astronomical recalculations or simply politics disguised as stargazing. You argue it's paperwork disguised as torture. You start by pulling out the master festival ledger. It's huge, heavy, and smells like myrrh and mildew. You flip to year 27 of the Reign of Light, where the old birthday is inscribed in gold red ink. With flourishes and flowers, you cross it out carefully, then rewrite it slightly earlier, but with double flourishes to hide the correction. You silently hope the decorative papyrus beetles you sketch in the margins distract from the obvious editing. You continue. The decree declaring Pharaoh's 37th journey around Ra now becomes approaching his 37th. The scroll about his 13th annual Youth Renewal Festival must be revised to read 12th. A hymn referencing "Born under Wadjet's waxing smile" must now reference Wadjet's quiet pout. You start to question the god's dental plans. Somewhere in the archives, a junior scribe knocks over a jar labeled "Horoscopic Allocations, Aries Division." You don't even flinch. By midday, you've updated 26 official scrolls, 3 royal wall plaques, 1 calendar glyph, stone rubbing, and the ceremonial birth ode given to temple musicians. Unfortunately, the musicians already performed it in public with flutes. You send a note to the High Temple. Please schedule a revised ode recital, preferably quieter. Halfway through the edits, a messenger arrives. New update. He says, "It's not just the date. The pharaoh's birth hour has changed too." You stare. New astrological alignment. He explains, he's no longer born at dusk. It's now at dawn. You pinch the bridge of your nose, so he's no longer a son of the evening, right? No, the messenger says brightly. Now he's a child of morning radiance. You close your eyes, open them, and whisper, I just rewrote the Ode of Evening Glory 6 times. The messenger shrugs. Better get a fresh pen. You do. You reword 20 stanzas of praise to swap out metaphors about twilight, mystery, and golden dusk now replaced with dew-sparkled beginnings, sun-kissed promise, and joyful rooster energy. You're not proud of that last one, but it rhymes in Old Egyptian. You then must revisit the scroll documenting the pharaoh's horoscopic traits, once a calm, reflective type now reclassified as energetic, full of dawn potential. Occasionally mercurial, you pause. Occasionally mercurial might actually be accurate. Historians still argue whether these changes were truly enforced or simply layered on top of each other, like a bureaucratic papyrus sandwich. You've seen scrolls with 4 overlapping date stamps and 3 conflicting titles for the same event. You once read a scroll where a scribe gave up and just wrote, in some year of some rain during flood season. You envy that scribe. As dusk falls, you seal the last scroll with a sigh, labeling it Revised Birth Order, version 4.1. You deliver it to the palace messenger, who bows and says, there's talk of moving the birth constellation too. If the priest can agree, you point your reed pen at him like a dagger. Don't. He leaves. You sit in silence, temple twitching, arms ink-stained, soul gently screaming. Then you hear a voice behind you. Did you update the stone calendar? You turn. What stone calendar? Pamiu winces, the public one. In the marketplace, carved in limestone. You stare into space, and you begin to laugh. Not a happy laugh, not a sane one, just enough to echo around the archive chamber and make the cat wake up. You wake up the next morning to a very serious knock. 3 measured taps, the kind reserved for either tax fraud or divine intervention. It's neither. It's Nebret, the palace stenographer. He's pale, shaking slightly, and clutching a bundle of scrolls like they're cursed. Which, knowing Nebret, they might be. I need help, he says. You blink. Did you spill ink on the decree again? He leans in. Worse. I invented shorthand. You blink harder. He explains. It's a new script. Faster, fewer symbols, cleaner strokes. I've tested it on palace notices, routine communications, even a few prayers. And he looks over his shoulder. I may have used it on a ceremonial flood decree last week. You pause. Did anyone read it yet? He nods, mouth tight. They read it. And then the Nile overflowed and destroyed 3 storage pits. Now everyone's blaming me. You exhale. You know what happened the last time someone changed sacred script? He swallows. They were reassigned to inventory worms in the papyrus bogs. Mainstream fact. Ancient Egyptian writing had formal and informal versions. Hieratic script was a cursive form used by scribes for everyday documents, more practical than the ornate hieroglyphs carved into tombs and temples. But even hieratic had rules. Strict rules. Fringe tidbit. There's one fragment from the Ramesside period that uses an odd, hyper-abbreviated script. Some scholars believe it was a prototype shorthand. Others think it was just a lazy scribe with a broken pen. Historians still argue whether early shorthand systems were innovations or infractions. But most agree, if you messed with the sacred layout, especially on ritual text, you did so at your own risk. You ask Nebret to show you the script. He unfurls a scroll and points proudly. See, 1 bird stroke replaces 3. And look here. I reduced an entire harvest line to 6 marks. You stare at the line. It reads, it could mean great abundance. It could mean the ducks revolt. You shake your head. You need to fix this. Now. But I submitted the original. He whispers. It's already been read aloud during the equinox pouring ritual. Your stomach drops. That ritual is serious business. It's where priests read flood predictions aloud while pouring sacred water into the Nile from golden pitchers. It's symbolic. Yes, but people listen. Farmers adjust their planting schedules. Priests write poems. Merchants place bets. You pace the room. Okay, you say. We do a reissue. We call it a clarified decree. We say the gods sent a revised blessing through the sacred ibis. Nebret nods eagerly. I love that. You sit down and start writing the replacement decree. It takes longer than you'd like, because you have to layer poetic metaphors thick enough to explain the same thing twice without admitting anything was ever wrong. Your final version reads, "Let it be known that Ra's message arrives in two winds, first as symbol, then as song. This second breath brings clarity to what the river already knew." Nebret stares. It sounds like it could mean anything. Exactly. You say, you send the scroll with a trusted messenger, one who won't stop at every beer stall along the way. You also include a fresh reed pen and a note for the high reader. Please interpret freely, but with emphasis on stability and patience. Just before dusk, a runner returns. He holds a small reply scroll, marked with a ceremonial seal. You unroll it and read. Decree accepted. Flood reinterpreted as a sign of fertile transformation. The gods approve of layered messaging. Please avoid abstract ducks. You slump against your desk, half laughing, half crying. Nebret hugs you, too tightly. "I owe you," he says. "You owe me 3 jars of beer and 1 week of copying tax tables," you mutter. As he leaves, you pick up one of his experimental shorthand sheets again. You can't help but admire the efficiency. It's messy, yes, but elegant in its chaos. There's something compelling about trying to control time with fewer marks. You sigh and file it under forbidden but interesting. Historians still argue whether scribes like Nebret were visionaries or dangerous meddlers. You suspect the truth is both. You reach for your ink pot. It's empty again. Figures. You dip your reed in the emergency wine ink. Today has already been cursed. Might as well finish it that way. The theft is subtle, which is, in itself, suspicious. You're reviewing scroll logs when you notice it. A missing tax document from last month grain inventory from the eastern silo, signed and sealed under your name. You're sure you filed it? You remember the farmer. You remember the way he insisted on counting each basket twice because one of them had special blessings. You even remember the odd smudge on the bottom corner shaped like a duck. Why are ducks a theme this week? But now it's gone. You check the cubby again. Then the misfiled section. Then the joke drawer where someone once stuffed a scroll labeled Royal Socks. Nothing. No tax scroll. No record of it having ever existed. And that means only one thing. Scroll theft. You shut your cabinet with theatrical force, which earns you a look from Pamu. Lost something. You nod slowly. More like something wants to be lost. He raises a brow. Rival clerk. You both glance across the archive chamber straight at Hedju. Of course, Hedju. Smug. Spotless robes. Collector of silver bookmarks. And recent recipient of the chief scribe's Efficiency in Filing Award. He didn't even blush when they read his name. Just smiled like he had a secret scroll tucked under his sash. You whisper. He's done it before. Remember when the fish census went missing? You mean the one that mysteriously reappeared, rewritten in his handwriting? Pamu leans in. Go get him. You march across the chamber, scroll pouch bouncing. Hiju looks up with faux innocence. Something wrong. Missing scroll. You say. He tilts his head. Ah, paperwork. So slippery. You resist the urge to slap him with your reed. Instead, you say, you wouldn't happen to have seen last month's silo records. He muses. Records. Records. He pulls open his desk drawer with dramatic flair and pulls out a scroll. Yours, except wait. You take it. Unroll it. It looks like yours. The farmer's name is right. The duck smudge is wrong. It's been redrawn, badly, as if someone tried to fake the smudge. You hold it up to the light. The ink is newer. The stamp, slightly crooked. A forgery. A bad one? You stare at him. You forged my scroll. Hiju shrugs. I replicated it. For preservation. Mainstream fact. Scroll theft and forgery were serious offenses in ancient Egypt, especially in temple and royal records. Scribes caught falsifying data could be stripped of title, fined, or reassigned to humiliating tasks like counting dung beetles or recopying flood records with no lunch breaks. Fringe tidbit. There's a legend about a scribe named Neshi who faked a grain shortage to help a poor village avoid taxes. When he was caught, he claimed a jackal spirit possessed his reed. The high priest debated it for 6 hours before sending him to the reed marshes to atone by collecting every pen he dropped. Historians still argue whether early scroll forgeries were criminal or just inevitable. After all, when everything is written by hand, Mistakes or manipulations happen. The real sin, you think, is doing it badly. You return to your desk and run a simple test. You hold Heju's scroll next to your ink reference sheet. Sure enough, his ink doesn't match your last batch. Yours had traces of basil and fig. His is all soot and attitude. You log the forgery, attach a complaint note, and send it to the archive supervisor. You add a polite footnote. For future reference, ducks don't have 5 legs. You think you're done, but then you hear it. Late that evening, when the archive is quiet and the lamp oil runs low, you spot movement in the restricted filing room. You slip off your sandals, creep across the polished stone, and peek through the cracked door. It's Heju. He's holding another scroll, your burial blessing draft from last week. You burst in, caught. He jumps. This isn't. Don't, you say. You already gave a duck 5 legs. He drops the scroll. Fine. I've been copying them. For what? He hesitates. Insurance. You stare. He continues, whispering now. In case someone tries to erase me, I've recreated every important scroll I've touched. So if I vanish, the work lives on. You blink. You think someone's trying to erase you. He nods, suddenly grave. You don't know what I've seen. You pause. That's either delusional or deeply concerning. You pick up the scroll. It's a perfect copy. Too perfect. Even the smudges match. Maybe Heju isn't a fraud. Maybe he's a survivalist. Maybe he's both. You leave him there crouched in the shadows, protecting paper ghosts. You file a quiet report, recommend a rotation to a less sensitive department, and lock your scrolls with extra wax seals. Historians still argue whether scribes were archivists, spies, or secret historians. You now suspect they were all 3, and some of them were preparing for war. It starts, like many catastrophes, with a promotion you didn't ask for. You arrive one morning to find your desk unusually clean, scrolls neatly stacked, ink bottles refilled, your pen replaced with a brand new reed cut at a suspiciously generous angle. Even the cat has stopped glaring at you. Pamu walks in with his arms crossed and a look that says, "You're about to suffer. They've promoted you," he says flatly. You blink. To what? Keeper of the seals. You stare. No. He nods. Yes. You sit back, eyes wide. The keeper of the seals is a ceremonial position, a symbolic post. Sounds fancy, but it's not. It's a death sentence made of wax and fear. You'll be responsible for protecting literally every official seal used by the scribal offices, temples, merchants, and sometimes confused goat herders who think they're royalty. Mainstream fact. Ancient Egyptians used clay or wax seals to authenticate scrolls, mark tomb documents, secure storerooms, and symbolize approval. Each seal bore a unique imprint, usually a deity, a title, or a fancy little boat, fringe tidbit. Some seals were cursed, literally. A handful of surviving impressions include inscriptions like, "May the thief who breaks this die by scorpion," or "He who removes this shall be bitten by his own dreams." That last one is creepier the longer you think about it. Historians still argue whether all seals were enforced or whether some were just ceremonial scare tactics. Based on the number of broken ones you found tucked inside sandals, you'd say both. You're led to the seal room, a cool chamber carved deep into the archive's belly. Inside, shelves upon shelves of small clay lumps wrapped in linen and stamped with everything from royal crests to angry-looking hawks. Your new assistant, Harkuff, grins like this is his dream job. "I've already inventoried the seal collection twice this morning," he says. You glance around. How many are there? 324. He beams, not counting the ones we don't talk about. You open your mouth. He shakes his head. Don't talk about. You nod slowly. Your job is to guard them. Sign them in, sign them out, record their every movement like sacred relics, which they basically are if one goes missing. It means forged scrolls could be released, fake tax decrees, false orders, chaos. Day 1. Nothing happens. Day 2. 2 seals go out for use, one for a burial scroll, one for a merchant's decree about stolen barley. Both come back fine. Day 3. Someone drops a seal. It bounces once, then rolls directly into a crack in the stone floor. Gone. Forever. You stare at the hole. You stare at Harkuff. Harkuff stares at the hole and says, "This wasn't covered in training." You spend the next hour trying to pry up floor tiles with a letter opener. You retrieve the seal mostly intact, only slightly chipped. And now, covered in spider webs and existential dread, you log the damage in red ink. Seal of Temple of Khnum. Minor surface crack. Blame assigned to physics. By week's end, you've developed a twitch in your left eye and a fear of dropping things. Your dreams are full of clay impressions and the sound of things thudding. Then it happens. You're asked to deliver a specific seal used only for the Queen's personal correspondence. It's large, oval, and embedded with a polished carnelian stone. Very dramatic. You walk it across the hall yourself, cradling it like an infant bird. And then you sneeze. Just once. But your grip loosens. The seal hits the stone floor with a sound like doom. You don't breathe. You crouch and see a crack. A clean, right down the center crack. You pick it up. The stone is fine, but the clay ruined. Pamu appears behind you. You drop the Queen's seal. You whisper, "It slipped." He pinches the bridge of his nose. Do you have any idea how many curses are linked to that thing? 2. You squeak. Try 12, he hisses, including one about hair loss and scorpions falling from ceilings. You race back to the seal room and grab the emergency replica kit. Yes, that's a thing. You craft a backup from fresh clay, reference the Queen's official pattern, and re-stamp it using the backup ring stored in a wax pouch labeled "Only in Disaster." You fire it over a flame, cool it, wrap it, present it. The Queen never notices, but you do. You know what's real, and what's just desperately good pottery. Historians still argue whether ancient seals were reused, remade, or secretly swapped all the time. You're now convinced that behind every perfect seal lies a very sweaty scribe and a well-timed sneeze. You spend the next day locking everything twice, then 3 times, then marking "Do not touch" on every shelf in 4 languages. Harkuff starts sleeping in the seal room. You don't stop him, because if a single one of those seals walks away again, you're going with it. You've spent your whole career documenting the lives, births, deaths, assets, animals, dreams, and divine whispers of other people. But today is yours. You wake before dawn, heart oddly still. No assignments, no errands, no barley counts or ink recipes or scrolls marked urgent in passive-aggressive red. Because this morning, you are tasked with writing the final scroll of your career, your own. You sit at your desk, yes, your desk, and lay out the tools of your trade like sacred relics. A fresh reed pen, a newly cut scroll, your signature black ink thickened slightly with crushed date skin for shine, and the wax seal with your personal emblem. A quill crossed with a fish. It's time. Time to write your death record. Mainstream fact. Egyptians prepared for the afterlife long before death, especially scribes. They recorded their achievements, virtues, and oaths, crafting scrolls that would guide their souls through the underworld's trials. To die unrecorded was to vanish entirely. Fringe tidbit. Some scribes included coded jokes in their death scrolls, tiny puns or alternate meanings slipped between lines. One famous burial record includes the phrase, "He who counts goats is never lonely," written in mirrored hieroglyphs. No one knows why. Historians still argue whether these death scrolls were reviewed by priests or filed silently, unread. But every scribe believes that somewhere, in some dusty room of judgment, someone is keeping score. You begin with your name, slowly, carefully. Binu, son of Maru, scribe of the Western records, recorder of barley and blame, keeper of one mistake mid-year, year 17, and beloved of his pens. You pause. You add, occasionally funny. You list your virtues. Diligent. Honest. Only forged one seal, and it was an emergency. Never once bit a junior scribe. Frequently washed hands before ink prep. You smile as you write, "This is your last script." It doesn't have to impress anyone. You record your preferred burial inscriptions. May I find balance in the scales. May the gods remember my jokes. May no one reassign me posthumously. You fold the scroll, seal it with a gold-tinged wax, and place it into the archive slot labeled "To be continued." There's a tradition among scribes. On the day you finish your own death scroll, you leave a gift for the next unlucky penbearer. Something small, something personal. You reach into your satchel and pull out your backup reed pen. The one that's seen droughts, weddings, funerals, festivals, audits, rat attacks, crocodile incursions, and one minor fire. You set it gently on the desk and write a note. This pen lies, but beautifully you stand, stretch, look around your chamber. There's the corner where a monkey once tried to eat your ink pot, the wall where you scratched a tally of all the days without mistakes, a short list, the shelf where you once hid from a temple inspector by pretending to be a scroll bundle. You've lived here, worked here, bled ink here. It's enough. Pamu appears in the doorway, arms folded. You done? You nod. Good, he says, softer now, because the archive's throwing a feast. In your honor. Your eyebrows lift. You mean with actual food? He snorts. A full basket of figs. No fish. You pretend not to tear up. As you follow him out, you leave behind your ledger, your worn stool, your stack of backup jokes. But you take with you something better, something few ever earn. A legacy made of lines. 1,000 scrolls bear your hand. A dozen lives found order because you wrote them into the world. The rest is silence and sealed jars, and maybe a humming urn somewhere that still remembers your name. And now, as we close the scroll on tonight's long, dusty journey, you lean back into the soft shadows of a scribe's afterlife, not buried in sand or stone, but somewhere quieter, paper thin, ink sweet, ever recording. Your fingers, still faintly stained, relax from the read. The room empties. The torch dies down to a golden glow. The ink dries smooth and final. Outside, the wind shifts the reeds along the Nile, gentle and warm, like someone whispering your name just once before letting it go. No scroll left unfiled. No jar left unlabeled. No mistake uncorrected that truly mattered. You were a keeper of truth. Yes, but also of the almost truths, the tender fudges, the scribbled footnotes, the human fingerprints in the margins of eternity. So sleep now. Under your blanket of papyrus dreams, no one will disturb you. The seals are set, the doors are closed, and the gods have already read your story. Sweet dreams. Scribe, you earned them.